So, this is the program, but first and foremost, welcome to Steen Nepper and reflections on the gravity of details.
So we need light in here because I don't need PowerPoints.
No, but we actually chose to have this slide standing behind you. Is it okay?
No problem.
Very good.
I think the phone is on. Sorry. Is it on?
Hello.
Think so?
Yeah. Okay. Oh, wow. What a lot of sound. So when I give lectures, I never use PowerPoint. So you have my handouts, so you can follow this presentation. It's a big honor to be here. And I'll try to go directly to the theme. Reflections on the gravity of details. I come from the side alley. I'm no architect. So this comes from sociology, history, and educationalist thinking. Basically something to irritate you, maybe to let you wonder. First of all, let's try to grasp and handle capitalism. Well, it's a big thing. Or as my sister says, architect, it's economy, stupid. So let's start out with a kind of historical view. First, we had capitalism based on trade, imperialism, adventure ships, merchants, state and missionaries around the globe, slave gold triangular trade with weapons one way, slaves the other, cotton the third, and we have Schimmelmann's big palace in Klampenberg and on Kongens Denmark was a slave nation. So we had moneymakers, we had people that built giant houses based on trade capitalism. Then we had second period, industrial capitalism, machines, oil, exploitation of skilled and unskilled labor, Fordism, big production lines, big assembly lines, and we had also humans and animals placed in factories, from chickens to wage laborers. We have international gold standards, and we had all around the globe industrialized capitalism. Well, it's still here. It's not that it's over and done, but in the third period, we have digital capitalism, we have World Wide Web, we have CAD-CAM, we have Silicon Valley, post-Fordism, and we try to get away from the restrictive gold standard, and we make the irrealization of the economy, and since 1971 we haven't really understood what can go wrong and what big crisis we can produce through financialization and irrealization of capital. And now we are on the threshold to our era, and in our era we could talk about cognitive capitalism. In cognitive capitalism, creative ideas and innovative designs, they become precious values in Wall Street. And you could say that men, they primarily sell their ideas, their creative ways of thinking, not their handcraft or their wage labor in normal senses, but they invent things, they create things. So in cognitive capitalism, we have, of course, also here big amounts of big data, we have printed elements for buildings, we have all kind of oxymorons we come to live about, biopolitical management, at the same time realization of our creative freedom. It's both freedom and mandatory at the same time, and therefore also the headline of this lecture is actually also oxymoron. We have gravity of details. Details seem to be forgotten. Details seem to have no gravity, no weight at all, but we still have to reflect upon what is actually respect of the detail, and the rest of the lecture will debate that. Because this lecture is accentuated by the apparent easy access to design the future or whatsoever. Design is everything, as Bruce Mao once wrote, trying to be a kind of a super god of metaphysical design, self-love. And you could say that you become maybe print gods of the future building sector, or you have the simplified ready-mades there for you. We are on the threshold to be able to design whole buildings, whole houses, and this lecture dwells upon this apparent power and maybe also the apparent failures or traps hidden in this process. But we are in the midst of a transformation on macro scale from different types of capitalisms, and they're actually all here. We still have capitalism based on trade, some kind of modern form of slavery. We still have industrial capitalism. We still have digital capitalism, and we have cognitive capitalism. So we are living in the midst of these transformative macro scales, what people will call, and it's a word that you cannot really nearly explain or express, it's non-contemporaneities. It's better in German, Ungleichzeitigkeiten, or in Danish, usamtidigheder. We are in the midst of all these different times at the same time, and it makes us maybe also wonder how to grasp this society in which we are making architecture. We could say that the architect has to find his or her way right in the midst of this. Some architects line up with, an example, experience economy as a headline of what they're doing, branding economy, branding architecture. They're trying to set a sign in the traffic of signs and so on. But I have another view, and it comes now on page 2. My way is going with Theodor Wiesengrund Adorno and critical theory. Some of you might have read a little bit about aesthetische Theorie, aesthetical theory, or maybe dialectics of enlightenment. But here is a very good concept of Adorno's based on page 2. First in German and then somewhere down there in English. It's better in German. Die Utopie der Erkenntnis schwerer, das Begrifflose mit Begriffen aufzutun, ohne es ihnen gleich zu machen. There are also people here from ETH and other places, Darmstadt, so they understand that. For those of you idiots who don't understand any kind of German, of course you have to have it in English. The cognitive utopia would be to use concepts to unseal the non-conceptual with concept without making it their equal, which is kind of interesting because we have actually here a tension between conceptualization and the non-conceptual. So my whole idea is now to think about the detail as a non-conceptual, something that's waiting for us out there to be respected, but we don't really know how to grasp it without classifying it and without putting it into a prison, you might say. So, great expectations. In the zeitgeist of today, we have both bleak ideas. The robots will take over. Big data will destroy science. And you have an example, this Chris Anderson from Wire magazine, Note 4, where he actually writes something like this. We could close all schools, all universities is his, right? Chris Anderson, he writes, "This is a world where massive amounts of data and applied mathematics replace every other tool that might be brought to bear. Out with every theory of human behavior, from linguistics to sociology," and you could also say architecture, history, building principles, whatever. Okay, forget taxonomy, ontology, and psychology. Who knows why people do what they do? The point is that they do it, and we can track and measure it with unprecedented fidelity. With enough data, the numbers speak for themselves. That's 2008. So why wonder? Why think about science? Why think about philosophy? Because everything is out there. So we have great expectations to this idea about how we can create also well-being, happiness measurements, all kind of ideas on how to build the ideal city for people. And but the whole idea with my quote from Adorno is that this non-conceptual could be like togetherness, happiness, and individual perspective. It can never be construed or designed from an architectural standpoint. So I ask for modesty in this branch, that you can never ever construe the cozy Denmark, the happy Denmark, the well-being Denmark on a schedule, not even on a computer screen. So people think we're standing on the threshold to fuse and reconcile ontology, which is being or how the world is, and epistemology, acknowledgement theory, how the world could be thought of as an object. But I have this idea that this bodiless 3D design is really easy, accessible, and it's also technological possible, but it's never the world one-to-one. It will never be able to be a one-to-one reflection of ontology, epistemology, technological possibilities. So that's the basic philosophical standpoint I have. So another data or another quote of Adorno, which is really great. He writes in a book, "If the thought really yielded to the object, if its attention were on the object, not on its category, the very objects would start talking under the lingering eye." Or in German, this is better. "Und äußerte wirklich der Gedanke sich an die Sache, gelte dieser nicht ihrer Kategorie, so begenne, Konjunktiv, so begenne das Objekt unter dem verweilenden Blick des Gedankens selber zu reden." And this is my dream, that we could have the objects to talk for themselves and talk to us, which is also in German means Gegenstand. They stand against us with a certain power. So we have to maybe to reflect upon how objects could not be object under the sovereignty of a subject doing something to it in a technological way, but how we can respect their Gegenstände, that they are fighting back or demanding something of us. So that's basically my standpoint. You have it on page 3 here. You could also say it in this way. It actually goes back to the presentation of the two professors, which dealt with craftsmanship and the search of excellency, and you can read about that in the American sociologist Richard Sennett. He wrote really good books about that. Also the culture of capitalism, and the next word is actually in search of excellency and craftsmanship. So you can say it in this way, page 3, top. Do not classify a complex case to something simple and controllable and fail to obtain exactly that which could have taught you something new. We know it from encounters with art. To meet art and architecture, one must be actively endure, fight and negate the noise one brings with oneself in order to classify what's already there. So if you start out with an ism or a classification logic, you'll never see the artwork. So my idea is that you have to start out with a certain respect of this Gegenstand, this gravity of detail that can kind of restrict your technological ambition maybe, or maybe irritate your ambition when it becomes too much in self-love with itself. So now comes page 3 on the kind of threshold to ethics. Academic and architectural craftsmanship. You could talk about craftsmanship and careful professionalism, it not only as a high-profile word or even a buzzword, but you can maybe talk about it as a kind of an intensive, an inventive craftsmanship. It's a solid professionalism. And I see craftsmanship as a lifelong unsettled matter with challenges and importunate duties that thoughtful and active people are occupied with, while they engage themselves in doing something when they're dedicated to the world and its enigmas, and even doing something that you could call self-transcendence, or even transcending of economic speculations or a prioris. In German, it's actually good expressed in the word Dezentrierungskunst, that you kind of decenter yourself from a central perspective and economical perspectives, or selling the building, or making happiness for the most best practice and evidence-based, whatever. And so it's a kind of a thought as a kind of a formation, you call that, or in German Bildung, that's related to the grand words and the heritage of the Enlightenment. And so my idea is that also architects, they have to be language critical people, not only running for the newest buzzwords. And you run for buzzwords like learning, competences, empowerment, or recovery, or whatever is at stake. And you try to linger with these in order to address politicians or building people with money and whatever can foster your buildings becoming true. But I would like you to think about these fuzzy and smart words out there. There were once, some of them, protest words, or maybe coming from bottom up, like the concept learning. When I was in school, there was not something called learning. Learning was indlæring, learning top down from teachers, and then learning was a protest associated with self-management of learning strategies from bottom up. And now we have learning goals from the state. They actually inherited it and transformed it to the bad opposite. And the same can happen to architects. So now come ethics. 10 kind of presentations, short presentations for you. First, ethics. What can that be said? Well, it's a part of our language. We actually have 2 words, ethics and moral. It makes it actually complicated in a way. What makes an action right or wrong? What is the relation between is and ought? That's a big problem. Can we go from is to ought? That's called the naturalist fallacy. And it has been debated in philosophy for many years. Can we, an example, say there were 6 million killed people in German concentration camps, therefore people should not be killed? Or is norm moral something completely different than positive addition of killings? Can we relate a pure positivist view to a pure kind of ethical view, or are they 2 different worlds? And you have that in what you divide as theoretical and practical philosophy. Okay. So basically, we have from the very beginning a problem reconciling what is there out in the world and how do we deal with the world when it comes to normative structures. So how do we regulate social bonds, interactions? How are values, how are taste systems, expectations, socialization patterns destined and doomed to contain values and ideas of what's better and what's wrong and whatsoever? So the whole question, how can we ever deal with these big questions also as architects? And I try to line out for you, as brief as I could do, 10 different dilemmas or 10 different views on ethics. And they are there with 2,500 years history in philosophy, and I'll go through them in like a quarter of an hour, and then you are done with westernized philosophy. Of course you are not. Then you are invited into at least to think about these different, very different ways of thinking about ethics. So the first one, you know, it's still here, it's out there. It's ethics as enforced law. In example, the law, the Ten Commandments, or Sharia, or whatever. It's kind of an idea, Sharia, Torah, that we can state something because God said it. Or we can make strict difference between duties and the forbidden. We can make apparently beyond human argument and free of investigation, even linguistic exchanges between humans. We can say God's will, the holy book, okay? And the holy written things in the stones or whatever. So here ethics as enforced law has, of course, if we start questioning it, the problems that it's inscribed as in eternal sanction and power logic in theocracies, which is not really something that we really want to live in. Probably most of us would have been fired in Turkey, or at least been, the head would have disappeared somewhere in Iran, I guess, if it was me. So ethics as enforced law is maybe too much of an ethical standard for the most of architects. You cannot really stand on a big screen or stand on a big scene and say, I defend that really tough ethics as law. Okay, therefore you can jump to position 2, duty-based ethics, or in German, Verantwortungsethik. It of course comes from the very inventive and very fantastic sociologist, grounding father, Max Weber, also people before him. I'll just make it simple. But duty-based ethic is, his terminology from 1919, and 100 years old, is about, also we have it in Kant, this categorical imperative that act only on the maxims which you can at the same time will to be universal laws. The will means what you rationally want can also be labeled the universality principle. The other way Kant express this, and Max Weber also quotes him, is treat other people as ends in themselves, never solely as means to an end. Respect humanity in and of the other. And this is an idea that you have a Verantwortung, an obligation, a duty, based on never ever use the other person as an exchangeable something. He is an end in and for himself. So here, Verantwortungsethik, well, I guess that touches upon something for architects, because you think act under the maximum which you can be, that it could be a universal law. If you make this kind of building, can you live with that? All of the architects in the world do the same building and you will still be fond of it. Or would you say, well, it's just my exception and I really don't like it, but I had to build it here. So if you are really self-critical, you end up in Kantian speculations about your own building logic. With duty-based ethics, I guess. It could. The problem here is, of course, that you are never ever tolerated to lie. If you hide a freedom fighter under your in the basement, and the Gestapo comes and say, "Do you have a freedom fighter in your home?" You say, "Of course, he's under the carpet, or maybe there's a secret entrance to the cellar." So, if you are supposed to be always telling truth, you'll end up never be able to give a white lie to save other lives. So you end up having all kind of problems here. There's no inclination to accept what Germans call Neigungen, which is inclinations in English, or tilbøjeligheder in Danish. You never ever accept any kind of something else principle, an exception or something. So there's no flesh, no blood, no embeddedness, no embodiment, no sympathy, no compassion, no pity. They are all kind of wrong ways of arguing. There's a strict principle and it's strictly logic. Verantwortungsethik. It's a maxim that you'd be able to generalize. Well, Adolf Eichmann, when he was imprisoned after the Second World War, and he was the logistic chief of Auschwitz, he said that I did my obligation due to Kantian ethics. Act in such a way that you can kill the most Jews possible and to live up to the Führer's word. And he perverted the categorical imperative, and therefore his book is called maybe Götzen instead of Götter. So in a way, you could say that Adolf Eichmann was maybe incarnating a kind of a perverse duty-based ethics. But at least I think duty-based ethics is something that you have to think about as architects. The next one is ethics as of the conscience. That's the other big word in this tradition, that Verantwortungsethik, Gesinnungsethik. In German, Gesinnungsethik, also of the conscience. Samvittighedsetik in Danish. Here you think about not so much the duty-based or the law-based stuff, but more on the intention. I intended these people to have a great life, Corbusier, in the suburbs of Paris, okay? And you think about Corbusier's great intention or his ideals or whatever. So here you talk about pure conscience, the goodwill. You are never ever actually interested here primarily in the effects or the consequence. Then you really think about the goodwill. He tried to save it, he tried to do his best and whatever. I think this also has something to do with an architectural approach to something. We focus on the intention. And who can ever tell what will be in 100 years? We'll become wiser, but who could know that at that time that functionalism will end out in blah, blah, blah. So, yeah. I also think actually that you shouldn't just tell that functionalism is the same as modernism, but that's another debate. We take that another day. But at least, ethics of the conscience, the problem is here a kind of a dreamlike, non-pragmatic approach, a religious, self-adoring ivory tower people that we kind of end up just talking about intentions, no effect. That's of course cannot stand alone, this principle. So, but I think it's also getting closer to the architecture branch, ethics of conscience. It's also there somewhere. You have some bonds in that company, I would say. And the next one is consequentialist ethics. That's probably the most dominant that you can think. It's also called utilitarianism, nytteetik. It goes by applied ethics, you call it in American. Jeremy Bentham. It's the greatest happiness principle or the principle of utility. Here you should do whatever you can do to bring about the greatest total happiness. That's what modern kind of structural, community-based, macro-national, competitive-based ideas is about. Do the best you can do to make the most people happy. Okay, so the utilitarian principle is, of course, a negative version is to strive for the least overall amount of unhappiness. Negative, but it's the same principle. The problem is here, of course, as it was always debated for at least in 200 years, that to compare Socrates and a happy pig, you could say, well, it's better to have a sad Socrates than a happy pig. So maybe you have to differentiate here. Whoever do you serve to have the utilitarian approach to something, and can we make that without differentiation in the group of the people we are building for, in example? So can we have a generalized, universalized utility principle? Yeah, actually, that's what people are thinking right now. If it's good for patients to have a green roof with plants, they get it, because there's evidence for that it'll be saving life, whatever, for Hillerød, the new grand hospital. So actually, you're tricking the architects here, because they're also destined and doomed to live up to utilitarian principle for necessity and for measurement and whatever. So we have this effect logic and economic autism, as I call it in my writings, økonomisk autisme, where you in a way try to refer everything in ethics to economy. And that's probably the economy, stupid. It's the branch of architecture today is really dominated by what is possible in an economic perspective. It's much more important than what's possible in an aesthetical or even a teleological vision you might have. And we jump to fifth principle in ethics. It is a very old principle, and we still not have finished studying its what it contains. An example, my good friend Ole Fogh Kirkeby, professor from CBS, recently retired, emeritus, he has studied the virtues in old Greek philosophy for whole his life. So it's probably not something you just can finish in a short while, but virtue-based ethics, an example, reading Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, is where you list up a set of virtues. It could be patterns of behaviors like benevolence, courage, honesty, strength, whatever, and you end up debating these as virtue-based ideas of character building that you have to incarnate in your person and in your approach to things in able to be a good man. The good citizen incarnates, in principle, virtues. And the virtues, they are principles that you should try to also fertilize in the masses or in a way to bring into society. Honesty, courage, and so on, benevolence. The Greek polis of rich and free white men plus 35, they had a democracy with no slaves, no women, no kids. So of course it was a kind of a privileged elite logic of this virtue ethics. But still, we have them something, and we used to have them somewhere out there in also Danish school systems with Østerborgerdyd, Vesterborgerdyd, okay? Also with this Tugend, Arete, virtues built into the very structure of educational systems. We had them until recently. Now we have changed them. Now Østerborgerdyd is Gefion, so they don't want dyder any longer. They don't want Tugend, they don't want virtues no more. So, but basically, this idea has a problem. Tribal ethics, only among peers, can it be universalized? That you find a certain strict set of 10 or 15 or 20 principles of virtues, and then you say, it's all about them. They are beyond history. They're standing on a universalized pedestal or high up there, and you have to live up to them. Then, of course, in these days, more and more architects line up with body phenomenology. They are inspired by not so much Martin Heidegger, but more Merleau-Ponty or Gilles Deleuze or Hermann Schmitz or Ole Fogh Kirkeby or whoever is out there writing about Maxine Sheets Johnstone. I don't know if that says anything to you, but a lot of writers these days, Gano Böhme, and the Logic of Atmosphere. You have a lot of writers now, also Levinas and so on, starting writing about ethics of the body. Here you could, in example, say that any body you could think of has maybe its own value in itself as something talking even to people who want to rape this body or kill it or manipulate it with it or put it in prison. Don't violate me, don't kill me, don't rape me. It comes out of the power of the eyes in Emmanuel Levinas' writing, The Ethics of the Eyes. And it comes out of the body perspective that we always, and Løgstrup says that, Danish philosopher, we always hold a part of the other's life in our hands. So we have here the respect of the human body, and the human body should live in freedom and be able to express itself, live itself in harmony, freedom, without being tortured or suppressed. And I think architects are really running after that these days. They try to build a secure town for women to go in the night, lights, and how close we should the proximity lines in tunnels, and how people should deal with traffic, and how we should build all kind of things so we do not tend to build a violation of the social bonds between human beings. No matter when and whom and how we are, we could say that circumcision is a brutal act. You can talk against that on the behalf of the body and the self-determination from inside out. The body has a right not to be circumcised. An example. You can also have another way, and I think that has a certain structure and it has a certain place in modern architecture. Then you have ethics of the event. And the event is really something that comes in society. Whoever could know that the breakdown of the wall in 1989 would happen? Well, a lot of social scientists, they met in the summer '89 and said the Iron Curtain will be here for many years to come, decades to come. Was skilled and very high reputed researchers said that they couldn't really think about that it could, 3 months later, the world was different. Okay, so the event, the power of the event could both be a catastrophe, it could also be a good thing, or it could be whatever. But the ethics of the event is something that French philosophers talk about, and they really investigate that. A lot of architects also read these people, like Alain Berthiaud, Gilles Deleuze, Guattari. An example, if you read Gilles Deleuze, who jumped out of the window when he was 70 with lung cancer, he writes in the 21st series of the event, in the logic of sense, logique des sens, and you think about this, with birth, of course, both the senses and the sense, as both reason and senses. It's smart, Deleuze. Okay, but the logic of sense in English, and then you forget about it. Then you only think it's about rationality. Okay, but it's not in French. Okay, so Columbia State University Press, logique des sens, and here it comes. It's a really beautiful quote. I think it's one of the best quotes about ethics you can find in philosophy. Either ethics makes no sense at all, or this is what it means and has nothing else to say, not to be unworthy of what happens to us. Here it is, I think architects are close to that. Whatever happens to my company, whatever happens to my brand, whatever happens to my way of thinking architecture, don't ever let me do something that's not on my level, that makes me become a person without dignity. a person without self-respect. So this idea not to be unworthy of what happens to us could be a basic line for saying, how long will I go with economy stupid? How long will I go with the state? How long will I go with the building matador? Because if you violate that as an architect, you get a really serious punishment by your own self-critique next morning, even though you become double as rich as yesterday, probably. So not to be unworthy of what happens to us, also respect that we never control the event. Who could know that suddenly we could make printing buildings? So it's not invented by you, I guess, and we could make a data amount of whatever, feeding our way of thinking about the happiness measurement or whatever. So it happens. It's a part of the logic of development on all kind of micro axes that we never control. So this things about ethics of the event is getting closer to your brains, I think. And the next three of them will also do that. And it can only be very brief. The planetary macroscopic ethics, you know, these Germans, they're really great. And this, of course, Karl Otto Abel. And Karl Otto Abel is these days 95 years old, and he worked together with Habermas. And read his book, Diskurs und Verantwortung, Discourse and Responsibility. In that he talks about the Anthropocene responsibility. Mankind only has one planet to inhabit, also destroy. There are absolute limits to economic growth. You also write that in Peter Sloterdijk, Ethik der Zukunft, and all these Anthropocene sense, and you work with that, all of you now, sustainability, critique of limits to growth and whatever, and that's 72, Rome Club, but now it's really getting embedded in all architectural logics. I heard yesterday Dan Stubergaard talk about papirøen. We have to get rid of this whole papirø because we're wasting all the energy out of the roof because it's not sustainable, this building. So we have to tear it down to build a new papirøen, okay? So basically, you argue with sustainability, limits to growth, respect for natural resources. So that's also a part of how you argue, I would guess, that you argue with macroscopic sustainability ethical arguments. The next thing is, well, that's more in the German tradition of critical theory and left Marxism. Here you talk about negative ethics, utopian ethics, or ethics of the not yet. And here you could read Ernst Bloch, Das Prinzip Hoffnung, whatever it's called. Hope Principle, no, it cannot be called that. Das Prinzip Hoffnung, Hope's Princip. Walter Benjamin, you could read Adorno, and here you defend the non-identical between the Gegenstand against the identity concept, and you say that there can always be another world out there. You can also defend something against the motor drive of normal society. In example, you defend deceleration against acceleration. You defend atmosphere against supermarket, well, whatever. Enforced commercialization, and you start up bringing all kind of ethics of the not yet and work on behalf of something that should be realized if people were supposed to be happy. So you work for the not yet ethics, bigger than what is possible in a utilitarian perspective. And then in the very end, I have Nietzsche, because you could also say, let's try to jump out of all this stupid bullshit, all these dualisms. And Nietzsche wrote back in 1888, Beyond Good and Evil, because he said that this good and evil logic, it was both in Plato and in the Christianity and in basic metaphysics, a kind of a trap that we were embedded in, and very powerful persons, they don't need to be there. They could go beyond good and evil. They can install a principle, and they could try to build up a freedom that is without ethical consideration in a dualism. But I don't know if you can succeed in that, and I haven't seen an architect really standing on a ghost protecting or saying, well, I'm a Nietzschean architect, I go beyond good and evil, and tell that to people in Ground Zero or something. They'll probably kill you, I don't know. Or here in Copenhagen, they would say, I don't understand what this guy is talking about. If they are social democrats, they do not understand one word of all. So I end up here in the last part of that paper, stating that there are tensions. I guess we have inherited all these 10 different ways of thinking. And some of them, they are on the axis between absolutism and relativism. Some are closer to one end of the spectrum than another. Others are close to universalist arguing forms, ways of arguing. Others closer to historistic. there are also people right now talking about there is something called a natural ethics among small apes and even among humanoids in like 6 million years ago. So you should start to talk about the naturalist ethical logic in tribes and in big groups of animals. And so you try to naturalize ethics. But basically that has been very criticized in many philosophies. But it's coming up, and you can read Michael Tomasello, Natural History of Human Morality, where he places morality within the biological sphere. But I didn't want to go through that today, but that's waiting for you. Then you can talk about rational ethic. That's something you can argue for. Or extra-rational or even irrational ethics, something that you cannot argue for. And you find that in example mostly expressed on one side, Jürgen Habermas, Diskursethik, where you have to argue, argue for your principle in an open communication and try to build a stronger argument so the other one must say, yeah, you are right. And the other way, you have Sartre stating, ethic has nothing to do with rational. It's helping another person trying to enter a bus, just stretching out your hand. Or the same is actually coming from Schopenhauer in the beginning of 1800. So where he stated that ethics is not something that you argue for in a rational way. It's spontaneous, or it's not. Another thing is, of course, that you could be speech act based or non-linguistic. This is about body ethics. It draws you upon your attention upon the non-linguistic. But if you go through argument and debate and how we should arrange our society and how we should build this way or another way, and you have an open discussion in your company and of architects, you always use discourse-based ethics to come up with the best argument. So you're in a way Habermasians when you are opening an office and you're arguing with one another with arguments. Then you cannot escape the discourse ethics probably. And the very end, and I've stopped now, it's actually 10 to or 8 to, 2 minutes I stole from you. You have, of course, this very tricky thing that moral and ethics is not the same in all languages. An example, we tend to think that in Denmark that moral is something that's out there being practiced, but ethics is second order, reflections upon it in a theoretical perspective. At the same time, we have in Danish something you call dobbeltmoralsk, as a twin double moral, when you are stating something, I'm so positive against feminists and female rights, and you stupid if it come over. And then you kind of, in your praxis, you are against women's freedom, or you are a male superior pig or a macho, whatever. So you have dobbeltmoralsk, okay? Twin double moral, but you cannot be double ethic. You can have a double etik, now to double etisk. So how do we use the words in different languages? Not in the very same way. The German had two, Moralität und Sittlichkeit, where Sittlichkeit was the embedded logic of ethics in the human interaction, but Moralität was a more like abstract way of debating it, and it's going in Hegel and it's going in Kant and whatever. I just state that this is maybe also something to debate when you are here from Holland, Denmark, Germany, Sweden, whatever, that we do not use the word in the same way. And maybe my 10 ideas of ethics, they will look very different if you invite a philosopher from Holland or from Spain or from Italy. I don't know, but this was my take. So, bye-bye.